What if I told you that the money in your pocket today buys you 3 cents of what your great-grandfather could purchase with the same dollar in 1913? Not because of some natural economic law, not because of market forces or technological change, but because of a deliberate architectural system designed by 5 men over the course of a single weekend in November 1910 on a private island off the coast of Georgia. This is not conspiracy. This is documented monetary history. And the pattern they created, the pattern of systematic currency debasement through central banking, has been replicated across every major economy on Earth. Today, we're going to dissect the architecture, step by step, architect by architect, because understanding this system isn't optional anymore. It's survival. The system that now controls the value of every dollar you earn was not built in a day. It was constructed sequentially, over decades, by men who understood that true power doesn't come from controlling governments. It comes from controlling the issuance of money itself. Architect 1 was Paul Warburg, German banking immigrant, 1910. Warburg didn't invent central banking. That honor belongs to European dynasties centuries prior, but he imported the blueprint to America. His innovation was political camouflage. He took the openly plutocratic European central bank model and wrapped it in the language of stability, public service, and decentralization. The Federal Reserve would not be called a central bank. It would have regional branches to appear democratic. But make no mistake, the architecture was centralized from day one. Architect 2 were Carter Glass and Robert Owen, 1913. These weren't bankers. They were politicians, and their role was critical: legislative alchemy. Glass and Owen transformed Warburg's blueprint into the Federal Reserve Act, passed on December 23, 1913, while most of Congress was home for Christmas. Their innovation was legal immunity. The Federal Reserve would be a private institution with public privileges. It could issue currency, set interest rates, and control money supply, yet it would remain largely unaudited, unaccountable, and insulated from direct democratic oversight. Architect 3 was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1933. FDR's innovation was the confiscation precedent. Executive Order 6102 made private gold ownership illegal for American citizens. Citizens were required to surrender their gold to the government at $20.67 per ounce. The government then revalued gold to $35 per ounce, an instant 69% devaluation of every citizen's purchasing power. But the true architecture here wasn't theft. It was monopoly. By criminalizing the alternative to fiat currency, FDR ensured Americans could not escape the Federal Reserve's monetary control. Architect 4 was Richard Nixon, 1971. Nixon's innovation was the final severance. On August 15, 1971, he closed the gold window, ending the Bretton Woods system that had at least theoretically tied the dollar to a fixed gold standard. From that moment forward, the dollar became purely fiat, backed by nothing but government decree and military enforcement. The constraint was removed. The printing press, now fully digital, had no limit. Architect 5 were Ben Bernanke and Jerome Powell, 2008 to present. The final architects perfected the normalization of crisis printing. Quantitative easing, once considered an emergency nuclear option, became standard monetary policy. Between 2008 and 2025, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from $870 billion to over $8.7 trillion. The innovation here was psychological, convincing the public that money printing at unprecedented scales was not debasement, but stimulus. The escape routes weren't just closed. They were made invisible. Let's examine how each architect's innovation built upon the last, creating a system where currency debasement became structurally inevitable. Paul Warburg understood European central banking intimately. His family, the Warburg banking dynasty, had financed governments and manipulated currencies for generations. But when he arrived in America, he faced a problem. Americans despised central banks. Andrew Jackson had destroyed the Second Bank of the United States in 1836, specifically to prevent centralized monetary control. The distrust was institutional, cultural, ancestral. So Warburg's genius was rhetorical. In his 1910 blueprint, crafted during secret meetings at Jekyll Island with representatives from J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Kuhn Loeb, he created the appearance of a federated system. 12 regional banks. Oversight boards with regional representation. The word federal in the name, implying government control. But the structure told a different story. The Board of Governors would be appointed, not elected. The regional banks would be owned by private member banks. And the system would operate with minimal congressional oversight, insulated by the excuse of monetary independence. The innovation was this: create a central bank, but never call it one. The trap: once Americans accepted this new institution as benign, even beneficial, the foundation for all future expansions of power was laid. Carter Glass, a Virginia congressman, and Robert Owen, an Oklahoma senator, understood that Warburg's blueprint needed legal armor. Their Federal Reserve Act, passed December 23, 1913, created something unprecedented in American governance: a private institution with sovereign powers. The Federal Reserve could issue currency, previously a constitutional power of Congress. It could set interest rates across the entire economy. It could create money from nothing through fractional reserve lending. It could operate largely in secret, with minimal disclosure requirements. Yet it was not a government agency. It was owned by private banks. Its governors served fixed terms, insulated from electoral pressure. And critically, it was exempted from standard audits. The innovation was sovereign power without sovereign accountability. But Glass and Owen added one more architectural feature: the Federal Reserve note would be legal tender. By law, all debts, public and private, had to be payable in this new currency. This wasn't optional. This wasn't market competition between currencies. This was monetary monopoly by legislative force. The trap deepened. With legal tender laws in place, Americans could not refuse the new currency. Every transaction, every debt, every contract would now be denominated in a currency whose supply was controlled by unelected bankers. By 1933, the Federal Reserve had been operating for 20 years. And in those 2 decades, it had already demonstrated its capacity for destruction. The Reserve's monetary expansion in the 1920s had fueled the stock market bubble. Its subsequent contraction triggered the banking panics of 1930 to 1933. But Franklin Roosevelt didn't blame the Federal Reserve. He blamed gold. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102. The text was chilling in its directness. All persons are hereby required to deliver on or before May 1, 1933, to a Federal Reserve Bank, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them. Failure to comply carried penalties of $10,000 in fines and up to 10 years in federal prison. Citizens were paid $20.67 per ounce for their confiscated gold. 8 months later, the government revalued gold to $35 per ounce, a 69% overnight devaluation. But this wasn't about the immediate theft. It was about architectural control. The innovation was criminalizing the alternative. As long as Americans could hold gold, they had an exit. They could protect purchasing power outside the Federal Reserve's paper system. But once gold ownership became illegal, once the alternative was criminalized, the trap was total. You could not escape inflation. You could not preserve wealth outside the system. You had to hold dollars and watch them devalue. For 38 years after Bretton Woods, the dollar remained theoretically tied to gold at $35 per ounce. Foreign governments could redeem dollars for gold. This created a constraint. The Federal Reserve couldn't print unlimited dollars without risking a run on gold reserves. By 1971, that run was happening. France, under Charles de Gaulle, was aggressively converting dollar reserves into gold. Other nations followed. U.S. gold reserves were hemorrhaging. On August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon appeared on national television and announced, "I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." The word temporarily was a lie. The gold window never reopened. The innovation was removing the final tether to scarcity. From August 16, 1971 onward, the dollar became purely fiat. Its value was no longer anchored to anything physical, anything finite, anything beyond the government's ability to print. And print they did. In the 52 years between 1913 and 1971, the Federal Reserve had expanded the money supply substantially. But in the 54 years since 1971, since the gold constraint was removed, the expansion has been exponential. M2 money supply in 1971, $600 billion. M2 money supply in 2025, $21.4 trillion. a 3,467% increase in just over 5 decades. The trap was now frictionless. There was no constraint on money creation, no physical limitation, no redemption mechanism, just faith and legal tender laws. The final architects didn't invent new tools. They normalized the nuclear option. Ben Bernanke, Federal Reserve Chairman during the 2008 financial crisis, introduced quantitative easing, the outright purchase of government bonds and mortgage-backed securities with newly created money. This wasn't lending. This was direct monetary injection into the financial system. Between 2008 and 2014, the Fed's balance sheet expanded from $870 billion to $4.5 trillion. But the true innovation came later, under Jerome Powell. In 2020, facing pandemic lockdowns, the Federal Reserve didn't hesitate. QE returned, but at unprecedented scale and speed. In just 18 months, from March 2020 to September 2021, the Fed created $4.8 trillion in new money. For context, that's more than the entire U.S. GDP in 1980. The innovation was psychological, convincing the public that this was normal. Inflation hit 9.1% in 2024, the highest in 40 years. The dollar lost more purchasing power in 3 years than in the previous 2 decades. Yet the narrative from the Fed was consistent. This is transitory. This is necessary. This is recovery. The trap was now invisible. Generations have grown up never knowing sound money. Currency debasement is no longer seen as theft. It's seen as policy. Saving is punished. Debt is incentivized. And the public, trained through decades of conditioning, doesn't question why their wages buy less every year. Let me show you what 110 years of this architecture has accomplished. In 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, $1 could purchase what $31.54 purchases today. Put another way, the dollar has lost 96.8% of its purchasing power in 110 years. This is not market forces. This is not natural economic evolution. This is the designed outcome of a system built to continuously debase currency, transfer wealth from savers to debtors, and from the public to those closest to the money printer. But the acceleration is what should terrify you. 50% of that devaluation has occurred since 1971, since Nixon closed the gold window and removed all constraints. 20% of that devaluation has occurred since 2008, since Bernanke normalized infinite money printing. And here's the pattern you need to understand. Every historical central banking experiment has followed the same arc. Germany's Reichsbank, facing war reparations and political pressure, began printing money to pay debts. The mark, which had traded at 4.2 to the dollar in 1914, collapsed to 4.2 trillion to the dollar by November 1923. Bread cost billions of marks. Workers were paid twice daily because money lost value by the hour. Savings were annihilated. The middle class was destroyed. The Weimar collapse wasn't gradual. The first decade of debasement was slow, manageable, then acceleration, then hyperinflation within 18 months. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, under Gideon Gono, printed money to finance government spending and agricultural redistribution. Inflation hit 89.7 sextillion% annually by November 2008. The Z-dollar 100 trillion note became infamous, worth less than a single U.S. dollar. Life savings became worthless overnight. The economy collapsed. The currency was abandoned. Zimbabwe's trajectory? Gradual debasement for a decade, then exponential collapse in under 2 years. Rome's silver denarius was the world's reserve currency for centuries. But emperors discovered they could fund wars and appease populations by debasing the coin, reducing its silver content while maintaining face value. Emperor Nero cut silver from 100% to 90%. Trajan cut to 85%. By 268 AD, the denarius contained 0.5% silver. The currency collapsed. Inflation became uncontrollable. The empire entered terminal crisis. Rome's collapse wasn't instant. It took 2 centuries of incremental debasement. But the final 50 years were catastrophic. Do you see the pattern? Every fiat currency in history follows the same sequence. First comes creation with constraints, gold backing, reserve requirements, public trust. Then gradual loosening through fractional reserves, partial debasement, emergency measures. Then removal of constraints as the gold standard ends and unlimited printing authority emerges. Then the acceleration phase where crisis printing becomes normal, inflation rises, and trust erodes. Finally, terminal collapse through hyperinflation, currency abandonment, and economic chaos. The United States is currently in stage 4. The constraints were removed in 1971. The acceleration began in 2008. And since 2020, the printing has reached levels that would have been unimaginable even a decade ago. Let me give you the numbers that matter. National debt, $36 trillion, which represents 138% of GDP. Unfunded liabilities, $213 trillion in Social Security, Medicare, and pensions. Debt growth rate, $1 trillion added every 100 days. Interest on debt, $1.1 trillion annually, more than defense spending. Here's the mathematical reality. The United States government cannot pay its debts without printing money. Tax revenue is insufficient. Cutting spending is politically impossible. Foreign creditors are reducing Treasury holdings. The only mechanism left is the Federal Reserve's printing press. But here's where the pattern accelerates. The more they print, the faster inflation rises. The faster inflation rises, the more they must print to service debt. The more they print, the faster confidence erodes. The faster confidence erodes, the closer we move to currency collapse. This is not speculation. This is observable, documented, historical pattern repetition. Every empire that debased its currency followed this exact sequence. Every central bank that removed constraints entered this same death spiral. And every population that trusted their government's assurances watched their savings evaporate. The question is not if this pattern completes. The question is when, and whether you'll be prepared when it does. Let me be absolutely clear about what this means for you. The architects of this system did not create it to destroy you personally. They created it to serve a function, to allow governments to spend without limits, to finance wars without taxes, to transfer wealth invisibly from savers to debtors, and to maintain power without accountability. You are not the target. You are the resource. Your labor, your savings, your future purchasing power, these are what the system extracts. Not through direct taxation, which creates political resistance, but through inflation, which is silent, invisible, and blamed on everything except its true cause, monetary debasement. But understanding the architecture changes everything. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Once you recognize the stages, you can position yourself accordingly. And once you understand that this system is not designed for your benefit, you stop trusting its stewards with your financial future. History provides a clear roadmap. Stage 1 is recognition. A small percentage of the population recognizes the debasement early. They move wealth into scarce assets, gold, land, Bitcoin, productive businesses. They are mocked as paranoid, but they preserve purchasing power. Stage 2 is denial. The majority continues trusting the system. They hold cash. They keep savings in banks. They believe government assurances that inflation is transitory. They lose wealth slowly, then rapidly. Stage 3 is panic. When the acceleration becomes undeniable, when food prices double in months, when savings lose half their value in a year, the public panics. But by then, the exits are crowded. Scarce assets have already appreciated beyond reach. Stage 4 is collapse. The currency loses legitimacy. Black markets emerge. Alternative currencies gain adoption. The government imposes capital controls, restricts withdrawals, criminalizes alternatives. The middle class is destroyed. Stage 5 is reset. A new monetary system emerges, often backed by gold, commodities, or a new fiat currency with restored confidence. Wealth is redistributed. Those who held scarce assets survive. Those who held paper currency do not. We are currently between Stage 2 and Stage 3. The denial is still strong. The majority still believes the Federal Reserve has control. They still trust that their dollars will hold value. They still assume the pattern that has repeated across millennia somehow will not apply to them. But the acceleration is visible now. Inflation is no longer transitory. Debt is no longer sustainable. Printing is no longer occasional, it's continuous. And the historical pattern is absolute. Once a currency enters the acceleration phase, reversal becomes structurally impossible. You now have a choice that most people in history did not have. You have been warned with time to act. The Weimar citizens did not know the mark would collapse until it was collapsing. The Zimbabweans did not know their dollar would become worthless until it was worthless. The Romans did not know their denarius debasement would destroy the empire until the empire was already in terminal decline. But you've seen the architecture. You've traced the pattern. You've watched the stages unfold in real time. So the question is not whether this pattern will continue. History tells us it will. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue holding depreciating currency, trusting that somehow this time will be different? Or will you position yourself in scarce, hard assets that have preserved wealth through every currency collapse in history? Will you continue believing the reassurances of central bankers who have presided over a 97% devaluation? Or will you recognize that their incentives are not aligned with yours, that their job is to preserve the system, not your purchasing power? I'm not selling you gold. I'm not selling you Bitcoin. I'm not selling you fear. I'm giving you the historical pattern. And the pattern is clear. Every fiat currency in history has eventually failed. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is 27 years. The dollar has been fully fiat since 1971. That's 54 years. We are living in the longest fiat currency experiment in modern history. And the data, the debt, the printing, the debasement, the acceleration, all point to the same conclusion the pattern has reached countless times before. The system is not designed to protect you. It's designed to extract from you. And the only defense is knowledge. Knowledge of the architecture, knowledge of the pattern, knowledge of the stages. The pattern is clear for those willing to look. The choice of what to do with that knowledge is yours.